Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can make your IELTS writing test to sound way more advanced and sophisticated by using higher level vocabulary and more formal expressions. So this is the part that I see most IELTS candidates have problems. We're going to cover a full essay and I'm going to show step by step which words you can use instead of a very, let's say, simple word. And I will cover a question, an opinion question. Let's first read the question. As the crime rate rises, some people suggest that the best way to reduce crime is to have more police officers on the streets. In your opinion, is this a sensible idea? So as you can see, this is opinion essay, and we should provide our own opinion. Do we agree with this sentence that the best way to reduce is to have more police officers or not? And we should also offer our ideas to this question. So let's just start with the first paragraph, which is introduction. And as you know, the first part, the first sentence of introduction is background statement. So I start with something like this. It is hard to know. So this is the sentence. This is actually a word that I see most IELTS candidates use. It is hard to know. So you can omit this one, hard to know. And you can come up with this phrase, almost impossible to ascertain. So instead of it is hard to know, you can write it is almost impossible to ascertain whether crime is going up. So go up, a phrasal verb, is considered as a kind of informal word. So we can provide more sophisticated and advanced level vocabulary. So instead of crime is going up, we can write criminal activity is on the rise. This is much more advanced. Now, but certainly, so certainly is a word that is used mostly in spoken English. So we can omit this one. And also but. So instead of but, we can write however. And instead of certainly, we can write indisputably. However, indisputably, people living in most parts of the world think. It's very simple, right? So we can write something else instead of people. And people living. So instead of people living, we can write inhabitants. Inhabitants, instead of most parts of the world, we can write inhabitants of the majority of the planet's regions. And instead of think, we can write fear. So inhabitants of the majority of the planet's regions fear that this is. All right. They say. So say is a very simple word. We can write claim. They claim that. They claim what? Lots of crimes are more likely than they were in the past. Again, this is a very simple sentence. You know, crime is a word that that is going to be used a lot in this essay, right? Because the essay is itself about crime, all right, criminal activity, so crime rate. So what a word or phrase can we use instead of crime? You know, there are a lot of alternatives. Now, what I write here, so let's read this sentence again. They say that I said, instead of say, we can write claim, that lots of crimes are more likely than they were in the past. So I write something like this. They are at greater risk of burglary, theft, mugging, online fraud, and even terrorism than they used to be. Than they were in the past, so they were used to be, all right? Now, they used to be. Now, instead of crime, I write some names of the criminal activities. Like what? Like burglary, like theft, mugging, online fraud, all right? So you can, instead of a specific word, you can come up with, let's say, some categories of that word, right, as you can see here. Now, some people, you know, people is, again, one of those words that most IELTS candidates use. So it's pretty easy, all right? So there are so many alternatives instead of people. It depends on the subject. It depends on the topic of the essay. If we are referring to those people who are in the field of crime, so we should write something about experts or specialists in the field of crime, right, instead of people. Now, what I write instead of people is this phrase: some specialists who have years of experience in the field of crime prevention instead of think, we can write consider that putting more police on the streets, it is again the same, let's say, word or phrase as we had on, let's say, on the question. All right, so I'm going to change this. This is very simple. Putting more police on the streets. Instead of put someone somewhere, we can write employ, all right, and also deploy. So I write my sentence something like this: consider that employing and deploying increased numbers of law enforcement officers instead of police. I come up with this phrase: law enforcement officers. So you can see how I'm playing with the synonyms here in this paragraph, all right? Increased number of law enforcement officers would help. Instead of help, you can write to tackle, right? So, would begin to tackle this issue. Now, this is the thesis statement I'm writing, but I think, I can write nevertheless. I'm of the opinion that this is a bad idea. Instead of this is a bad idea, so you can see this is very simple, right? This is a bad idea. I write it something like this: this approach would be a huge miscalculation. So instead of this is a bad idea, I write this phrase: this approach would be a huge miscalculation, and it might even lead to more crime. So again, I changed this phrase: might even lead to more crime. I could write something like this: could conceivably result in an upsurge in the number of offenses committed. All right. Most other times, that would be better if you use passive voice in your essay, right? Now, let's turn to our next paragraph, which is paragraph number 2, and I'm gonna provide my own opinion and the ideas. An intermediate IELTS candidate would begin by this one: the first thing to say. That's not a good one. That's not a good answer. It's not advanced, all right? So the first point worth emphasizing. The first point worth emphasizing is that there are some crimes. So again, crime is repeated here. So instead of some crimes, we can write certain offenses, which would probably not be affected. Instead of not be affected, we can write be entirely unaffected, all right? Which would probably be entirely unaffected. Unaffected by what? By having more police on the streets. Again, this is a repetitive word. Police is on the street. So we can write, by having more police on the streets, we can change it to raising the police presence. Raising the police presence. Now, examples include crime committed by people because they are poor or have a mental illness. Examples include crime committed by people because they are poor or have a mental illness. Again, this is a very simple sentence. So I change it to something like this: violent and non-violent crime, which results from the poverty, social deprivation, or mental condition of the culprit, is a case in point. So instead of examples include, I write a case in point, which has the same meaning. And this is a more advanced phrase, by the way, right? Also, I'm going to provide another idea, another reason to my point. So instead of also is used mostly in spoken English. So I write similarly. Similarly, terrorists with their strong beliefs Instead of strong beliefs, you can write extreme ideologies. Extreme ideologies will usually find a way of doing terrible things. Again, this is very simple, right? It's a pre-intermediate level sentence. Usually find a way of doing terrible things. So I write something like this. Almost invariably discover means of carrying out brutal and horrific acts. Instead of find a way, I write discover means of doing something. Instead of doing, I write carrying out. And instead of terrible things, I write brutal and horrific acts. All right? Even when there are many police officers. Again, police officers is repeated here. So I can write law enforcement agents. All right? So instead of even when there are, I can write regardless of the number. Regardless of the number of law enforcement agents available. In addition, now this is my third point here. Instead of it, in addition is good. You know, I don't mind using in addition in my writing, but there are much better alternatives. Like, for example, likewise. Likewise means in addition, but I consider it to be more advanced. Likewise, crimes like fighting will not go down just because there are more policemen and policewomen. Again, the word police is repeated here. Crimes like fighting will not go down just because there are more policemen and policewomen. So how can we change this sentence? All right, I write it like this. Putting uninformed officers on patrol is unlikely to reduce crimes, including forgery and domestic violence. Again, you see that I use alternatives instead of crime. And I give some examples of the specific crimes here. And what's that? Forgery, domestic violence. All right? So let's turn to our next paragraph. Right? So an intermediate level student would start his paragraph with this one. We should also say. It's better not to use subject pronouns in our essay. So when you when you have to use subject pronouns, you can change it to passive voice. So instead of we should also say, you can write it should also be mentioned. It should also be mentioned that many, instead of many, you can write countless. Countless. Countless studies surprisingly conclude. So instead of surprisingly conclude, you can write something like this. Indicate somewhat counterintuitively. Indicate somewhat counterintuitively. So instead of surprisingly, I write counterintuitively. That having lots of police officers on the streets, again, you see that it is repeated, police officers on the streets. Now, instead of police officers, I write policemen and policewomen. A significant amount of. Instead of lots of, you can write a significant amount of policemen and policewomen in public view. Instead of on the streets, you can write in public view. All right? Can increase crime. Instead of increase, I write something like this. Actually make crime more probable. All right? More probable. And increase how much people are afraid of crime. Again, this is very simple. The word crime is repeated. That's okay. If I use crime, that's okay because the topic itself is about crime. So I should not always use alternative instead of crime because crime is our, let's say, our basic word here in this essay. So instead of increase how much people are afraid of crime, I write something like this. Certainly heighten the fear of crime. So I don't write how much people are afraid. I write heighten the fear of crime. It is believed, instead of believe, you can write argued. It is argued that people who are thinking of committing a crime, we can come up with a much better alternative here. People thinking of committing crime. So they have not committed a crime. They're just thinking. So we can write potential offenders. potential offenders might see police officers on the street as a sign. Might see. So might see, that's okay. Police officers on the street as a sign. So instead of police officers on the street, I can write a police presence. And as a sign can be changed to as an indicator. As an indicator that crime, now I can use an alternative instead of crime. Criminal activity is a much better word here because I've used it a lot, crime, is normal and expected. Now, next sentence. These people might commit crimes which they would not have committed with fewer police. These people might commit crimes which they would not have committed with fewer police. So I'm going to change this whole sentence. So these people might commit crimes which they would not have committed with fewer police. This belief, I change it to this sentence. This belief might induce would-be lawbreakers. Would-be lawbreakers means those people who have not yet committed a crime and they're thinking of committing the crime later in the future. So I use would-be lawbreakers to commit robberies, assaults, or murders which they would not have contemplated. Instead of thought, I write contemplated if there had been not as many officers on patrol. So you can see how we can change a very simple sentence and word into a much more advanced and sophisticated sentence. All right? Now, one paragraph remains, and that is our conclusion. So what I see so many IELTS candidates write is, let's say, they write in conclusion. All right? So in conclusion is good. That's okay. There's no problem with that. But you can also use all the other alternatives, like, for example, having examined the arguments in detail. Having examined the arguments in detail, I think, instead of I think, you can write I am firmly of the view. I'm firmly of the view that the problem of crime can be changed into the issue of criminal activity. The issue of criminal activity is complicated. Instead of complicated, you can write has complex causes and solutions. All right? Although having more police, instead of have more police, you can write a greater quantity of crime prevention officers. A greater quantity of crime prevention officers on the streets look like a good answer. Looks like a good answer can be changed into appears to be an ideal response. Appears to be an ideal response. It is, I think. Instead of I think, we can write from my perspective. It is, from my perspective, not the best solution. So instead of not the best solution, we can write far from being ideal. There is no direct link. So instead of link, you can write correlation between crime and the number of police. So again, you see that crime is repeated here. So we can write crime rate. And number of police, we can write quantity of law enforcement officers. So this is the sentence. The crime rate and the quantity of law enforcement officers. All right? I wish, and this is our last sentence, I wish the government, instead of the government, we can write the authorities, would realize this and have new policies. Have new policies, we can write begin to implement more relevant strategies, which could deal with the question of why people commit crimes. I change it to something like this. Focusing on the underlying causes of the behavior of offenders. So that's it. That's our total essay, our complete essay. And you see that how we can change our 6-band score essay into an 8 or even 8.5 band score essay. So you have to be aware of the ways, of the techniques that you can use, or of the alternatives synonyms you can use in your essay in order to improve your band score in task 2. In our next videos, I'm going to focus more on using much more complex and sophisticated words in your IELTS task 2 writing. So stay tuned, enjoy your time, and goodbye.